Hello everyone, this is Jessica and Noam here for another episode of What's That Sound? Today we're looking at Nirvana's Heart-Shaped Box off the album In Utero.
It's Dave Grohl playing drums, it's Steve Albini engineering it. Everyone has been requesting this one like crazy. We are not scared even a little bit. Let's figure it out.
For our drums today, we used the 70s vintage Gretsch kit with our Ludwig Supraphonic. For our cymbals, we used a Zildjian 20-inch Crash Ride, a Zildjian 18-inch K Suite, and 14-inch K Dark Hats.
So you guys have requested this sound a lot. There's a ton of information out there as far as like what Steve Albini does. He's been pretty generous with like some of his techniques. We're gonna try a bunch of them on this sound. Steve Albini's studio is like 5 minutes away from our studio. So Steve, if you're watching, I'm very sorry if we butcher this, but we'll do our best. There's a few things that you notice when you listen to this drum recording. They're kind of living in two worlds at the same time. They feel very natural, but they also feel really like hyped up bombastic. They feel really in your face, but they don't feel that compressed, especially. And there is a few techniques that we know Steve Albini does that I think are contributing to that. A lot of that sound can be attributed to Pachyderm Studios, where they recorded this, which is a really iconic studio to get the record in. It also is very specific to where the room mics are getting placed and where the overhead mics are getting placed and how they're all kind of fitting together. So let's look at them one by one. So on the kick drum, we used two microphones. On the kick in, we used a 421, very classic kick drum sound. On the kick, I won't call it out, but the batter side of the kick, we used a less conventional thing, which is a $50 lav mic. We just let it dangle off of the side of the kick drum so that it was kind of dangling, 4 inches up above where the point of contact was on the kick drum. That batter side mic, first off, we have to flip the phase, right? Because it is going to be phase inverted from the kick drum mic that is inside the kick drum. Second thing you'll notice from that sound is that it has a ton of bottom snare on it, right? The lav is a very bright mic in general. It's a condenser. It's going to pick up kind of everything around it. It's omni. It's really, really intense how much bottom snare is in that microphone. Part of that is desirable, right? It does affect the sound of the snare drum quite a bit in a kind of cool way, but it also is a little bit uncontrollable. So to control that, we used a compressor on that microphone and we had it triggered off of a side chain from the snare drum. So every time the snare drum hits, it causes a compressor on that kick batter side microphone to compress it. The result is that depending on how we set the threshold of that compressor and the ratio of that compressor, we can decide to a pretty precise degree how much bottom snare we want in that microphone. The only thing that you might think is kind of weird is what happens if the kick drum and the snare drum get hit at exactly the same time? Doesn't it kind of change the sound of the kick drum for the snare drum to be lowering it? It does, but the truth is that when you hit a kick drum and a snare drum at the same time, both instruments sound pretty different anyways, right? So the high end of the snare drum kind of makes up for the lack of high end that you're losing a little bit in the kick drum, and it all kind of sounds pretty natural. On snare top, we know Steve Albini notoriously really hates 57, so we made sure not to use that. We used an AKG 451. This is a small diaphragm condenser microphone. It's really hi-fi, it's really bright. You can't really stick it so close to a snare drum without sticking a 20 dB pad on it. So we stuck that on to make sure we weren't distorting the mic. No bottom snare. The batter side was picking up plenty of that. So you'll notice that on the toms, we are using a top mic and a bottom mic on every tom. This is less typical. Usually people will just stick microphones on the top of the toms. On a tom, when you strike it, the top head is resonating, but it's also pushing air inside of the drum that is resonating the bottom head, right? It's traveling through the shell. The whole thing is resonating together. And the sound of those two heads together contributes significantly to the sound of the drum, right? They might be tuned dramatically differently. There's all kinds of things that might make it so that when you stick a microphone on top of the tom, it does not necessarily sound the way that that tom sounds in the room. You're only hearing a portion of the sound. Now, if you just put up one mic, you can pick up the rest of that sound through room mics, through overheads, through anything that it has some distance to it, but in terms of getting a really well-rounded direct mic sound, you might not be getting the full picture. So we stuck a microphone on the top and the bottom. They are both exactly the same microphone. They are 414 AKG condenser microphones. We have the 20 dB pad on them so that they can handle being really close to the drum. We are going to phase invert the bottom one because the direction that the top head is moving is opposite to the direction that the bottom head is moving, so they're going to be completely out of phase with each other. You flip the phase, they're going to lock in really close and really add to each other. So the overheads are super, super weird in this. This is like a technique that you will not see a lot of people do. For the quote unquote overheads, we were using Coles 4038s, really dark ribbon microphones, and they were stuck behind the back of the drummer. The theory behind this is that it's kind of picking up what the drummer would hear behind the kit. It's picking up cymbals, it's also picking up a lot of the actual drums. It's a pretty well-rounded drum sound in itself. It also, because it is a ribbon microphone, it's gonna pick up quite a bit of the room sound as well, right? More than usual. Usually if you stick ribbon mics as your overheads, the null point is facing in the direction of many, many of the walls. Now, if you take these overheads and you have them facing the walls, the null points are hitting a couple walls, but there's also many walls that are getting picked up by those mics behind your ears. In addition to the overheads, we stuck a pair of XY microphones. These were Shep's V4Us. They're really hi-fi condenser mics. We stuck them kind of right in front of the kit, right? And this is meant to pick up, yes, cymbals, round out the cymbal sound, but also to pick up a bunch of elements of the drums that you might not pick up otherwise. The way that the kick drum sounds in these mics is really different than the way that it sounds in the quote-unquote overheads. Together, they kind of make a more well-rounded version of this sound. On our rooms, we used a pair of small diaphragm Omni condenser microphones, and we placed these in really weird places. They are placed on the floor, taped down. The idea behind this is when you stick a microphone on a stand, there's a bunch of early reflections that come directly from the floor. So you're getting reflections from all of the walls in the room, but you're also getting much closer reflections off of the floor. Now, if you take microphones and you stick them on the floor, that is gonna help get rid of one of those reflections, right? You're not getting timed reflections from the floor, you are just getting the direct sound and you're getting reflections from all of the other walls. It helps to use Omni microphones for that. Proximity effect is a thing in most microphones except for Omni mics, and when you're sticking a mic right on the floor, you might have a lot of proximity effect. Omni microphones kind of take care of that. Now, the last thing with these room mics is they are delayed. We delayed these room mics about 20 milliseconds. When you delay room mics, what you are essentially doing is making it feel as though the room is bigger than it actually is, right? When you listen to this recording, it kind of sounds like they're flamming, or like the snare drum is getting played as a flam or something like that. What it seems like is actually happening is there is room mics on the recording and they are delayed slightly, and that is causing this kind of larger than life sound. It's unnatural because you're taking mics and you're changing the time that they actually happened, but it strangely also feels natural. One reason to be doing this is when you have a room that is small enough where the room mics are going to be not so distant from the direct mics, you start to get phase interactions that happen, right? If you go and flip the phase on your room mics, you're gonna notice that the sound of the kick changes pretty substantially. The sound of the snare might change a bit, right? This is because there is some phase interactions happening. The further that you separate those from each other in time, the less phase interactions that you're gonna have to deal with, right? The fundamental note of the snare drum, of the kick drum, has already happened by the time that the room mics start on that note, and so they're not interacting that much. Delaying the room mics, it fixes some of the like frequency cancellation stuff that you might have to deal with. Otherwise, you have to play around a lot with the timing of this, right? Because it is very, very fine detail, the point where it starts to get weird phasey stuff, or the point where it starts to feel like a weird slapback delay. There's a really small sweet spot, and when you really find it, it starts to feel really, really natural. I'm not sure if Steve Albini did this, but I was finding the slappiness of the delayed room mics on the kick drum to be a little bit overwhelming. I liked it on the snare, I didn't love it on the kicks. So I added a compressor on the room mics, and I triggered that compressor off of the kick drum. So every time the kick drum hits, it compresses the room mics, so it lowers the attack of those kick drum hits and lets the kind of release, the like length of those kick drum hits really come through from the room mics, but not necessarily the flamming attacks. As far as processing, we didn't do a ton. There is a little bit of compression on the room mics with a TG1 compressor. We very lightly compressed everything else, but really, really gentle stuff. And for the most part, we just left these natural. We used a little bit of tape emulation because Steve Albini would have been recording this to tape, right? And the saturation of the tape would have controlled the dynamics a little bit. We also added a tiny bit of reverb just to boost things up. Outside of that, the processing was pretty natural. Let's listen to everything together. That was Nirvana's heart-shaped box drum sound.
Thank you for watching, and please let us know in the comments what other drum sounds you'd like to hear us break down. Let's
That's
grow
right,
and roll.
baby.
You
Come on
ruined
now.
it.